Most of the teams in the VCT EMEA League have been set in the offseason, so it's time for us to go through all 12 teams and talk about have they improved, have they gone worse. We will be going through every single one and be ranking them by category. So this is the board we have today. We have all 12 teams right below me. We will be going from bottom left to top right, so we will be starting with the newest member of the EMEA League, and that is Apex. So Apex don't have a confirmed roster at this point, but what we do know is that they lost 3 players. These 2 players are Kayak and Soulcast, 2 players that joined their roster for the 2024 season. These players have since moved on to different opportunities in Tier 1 EMEA. They might be bringing in a player by the name of Fitno, who was previously in the EMEA League as well, but it's hard to argue that what they have lost in this offseason so far hasn't made the team at least a little bit worse. This is going to be mostly a completely different team. They still have at least 3 players from the previous roster. Maybe they'll be able to recapture some of that magic that they had going into Ascension and throughout the past 2 years of Tier 2 Valorant. They basically had 2 separate rosters for both Ascension tournaments, and they were able to go far in both of them. So maybe they do some of that again, but again, I think it's hard to say that they're anything at least worse. I'm tempted to put them in much worse, but I think just worse. I think that's fair for them. Moving on, we have Giantex, another team that is going through a lot of changes. After having a pretty mediocre roster in the 2024 season, which was a bit of a far cry from where they were in 2023, where they were at least an okay team, a lot more mediocrity for them this year, so they're looking to dig themselves out of that hole. They no longer have Redgar, and they are apparently bringing in replacements in Thomas Z and Runner, 2 players that were playing in Tier 1 Valorant in Europe, but were kicked off of their previous rosters. So those are 2 players that could make an impact. This team has mainly looked to put themselves back in the top 5 conversation for EMEA, and I don't know if the roster that they've put together can particularly do that. Can it get them out of the basement of Europe? I think it's possible, so maybe we can say that they improved a little. I don't think there was a lot that they lost that is super detrimental to their future plans. Moving on, we have Team Liquid, a team that in previous years in Valorant did quite well for itself, but had a very disappointing year in 2024. They've had Nats for a couple years now, and he definitely has not been the problem on that roster, so he is staying on there. They do lose Mystic, Enzo, and Yampi in the offseason, and they are bringing in Camo, Patatek, and Kamek. The Camo pickup is very controversial because he has had some past controversies, but we're not here to talk about that. Patatek was definitely a big commodity in the offseason. He showed some incredible skill being Team Heretic's sub in Masters Shanghai, so there's a lot of promise there, and we'll see if he can recapture some of that magic. I do hesitate to expect that we're going to see him at that level again, because I think that was a very opportunistic, form of Patatek. I don't know if that's the player that we're going to see consistently, but they're also bringing in Kamek, who is a Tier 2 player. So I think that these additions aren't exactly big game hunting. You're bringing in a Tier 2 player, you're bringing in Patatek, who hasn't had a roster for a little bit. These are some pretty solid additions, and what they lost in the offseason, Yampi's a really good player, so I think we can maybe say that they maybe improved a little, but I kind of hesitate to say that. Overall, I think what they have done to replace what they lost, I think it could be better, but I think I'm going to put Team Liquid in about the same. I'm not sure if these additions are going to make up for the loss of Yampi, who by the end of his time at Liquid definitely wasn't a fit there, but he still is a very talented player, and we'll see what ends up happening for Team Liquid, but I think they might find themselves in about the same boat that they did in 2024. Moving on, we have the other team that made it through Ascension, but just in the previous year, beating Apex. This is Gentlemates. Gentlemates kept their Ascension roster into the 2024 EMEA season, giving those players a chance to see if they could replicate their success at the Tier 1 level. I think that's a good thing to do for Ascension teams. However, now with the new rules of Ascension, the stakes are a lot higher, because if they don't perform better than Apex, they will be kicked out of the league. So it's a lot at stake, so they have basically rebuilt their roster, and they're bringing in Zipan from Na'Vi. Very good pickup there, pouncing on an opportunity to pick up some players that have a lot of experience in Valorant up until this point. Also bringing in Click, Robbie BK, and a player by the name of Mini. So these are a lot of Tier 2 players coming in. Seems like they picked up some pretty decent talent overall. Definitely like the Zipan pickup, and we'll see how these other players that were playing in Tier 2 previously go into Tier 1. Don't see this team making a big impact in EMEA this year, unfortunately, but I do think that they are better than they were last year. Moving on, we have Koi, a team that has been basically at the very bottom of the EMEA League for 2 seasons now. However, this offseason, it looks like they have finally dedicated themselves to building a decent roster. Remember that their 2024 roster wasn't set until like a week before the season started. Apparently they're bringing in Soulcast, stealing him from the Apex roster. That's some good poaching right there. Also, apparently picking up Flya from MXS, bringing him over from Tier 2 North America. Great pickup if it works out. They are keeping Shados and Grabino, bringing in another player by the name of Filu, I believe is how you say his name. So this looks like a roster that definitely is improving from what they had previously. Not that they didn't have talent at all beforehand, but when you finalize your roster like a week before, not exactly the good decision to make. So definitely starting a lot earlier and grabbing these players that are available, that are kicked off of previous teams. This is a good thing. Even though I don't know if I see this team getting to a really top point in EMEA, I think this can at least be said that they're a lot better. Again, we're going from like the basement to maybe a mid-tier team. So it's maybe not the biggest improvement, but I think it is at least a good one. Moving on, we have Carmine Corp, a team that has made some huge waves in the offseason. Getting rid of everybody from the 2024 roster aside from Martin, that is a debatable move as to how good or bad it is. Losing Narrate definitely hurts, but Magnum maybe wasn't the fit for IGL that you needed. Thomasy, talented player. Shin, talented player, but are those guys that you expect to bring this team to champions, which they definitely want to make. They want to make champions Paris. So what do they end up doing? Well, not going with any French players apparently. They do bring in Sadak moving from VCT Americas, so thank you EMEA for doing that as a person that watches a lot of Americas. They also pick up Soigetsu, which is an insanely good pickup. I think that's a really good choice, especially with having Sadak and Soigetsu. I think that's going to be a great combo. And then picking up some other players like Elite, a Turkish player who played on BBL, I believe, last year, as well as another player by the name of Avaz, an Egyptian player. Overall, this looks like a pretty solid roster overall. Definitely one that should be able to contend for top spots in the league. My one hesitation with it, which I definitely have about teams that are going big game hunting, is will this work chemistry-wise? Sadak is a great IGL, but will he be able to work with Soigetsu? Is this, definitely very solid amount of talent here? Is it going to all gel together? So while I do have concerns about how this roster is going to gel together, I still think this is a massive improvement from what they had last year. Last year's roster had talent on it, it just didn't have the right pieces. And I think while they lost a lot of talent, they've replaced that talent with some pretty solid players and one of the most storied IGLs in Valorant's history. In my opinion, it really just comes down to that chemistry and how things are going to work, but I do have confidence in both their coaching staff as well as Sadak. Moving on, we have the Turkish team in FUT Esports. FUT Esports only made one change in the offseason, that is swapping out CNED for Zeus. So swap out one Turkish duelist player for another Turkish duelist player, and CNED, while he has had a definitely put his stamp on the history of Valorant, I think his time as a top duelist in the world has long passed. He still is a solid player, there's still talent there, but we haven't seen him dominate the way that he used to all the way back in 2021. So even though CNED wasn't a particularly bad player for FUT last year, you swap out him for Zeus, a younger player, and I don't really know much about him, but he has been playing in Tier 2, and the team has been doing well in off-season events. So far, it looks like a pretty solid move. Does it make them particularly better? I'm not sure if it does. I think just swapping out the one player and you might be getting the same amount of skill, I think that puts you in about the same. Potential to be improved a little, but I think they didn't want to make too many changes to a roster that did have some decent success last year and the season before. I definitely have faith in FUT. I want to see these Turkish teams do well. I want to see, the European region get more diversified, and Turkey seems to be a very good talent pool for Valorant right now. It's very happy to see that, and we'll see if FUT ends up improving from what they have. Moving on, we have Team Heretics, a team that was the runner-up in both Champions and VCT Masters Shanghai. They did not make any roster changes in the offseason, so there was not really much discussion around them. They are in about the same. I don't think they needed any roster changes. I think they have one of the best rosters in all of Valorant. I think this is going to be an incredibly good team for years to come if they keep everybody together. I expect them to win a tournament this year. I've talked about in previous videos, and I have a lot of faith in them. So very glad that they didn't make any rash decisions about losing in the grand final and ended up swapping out somebody. Moving on, we have Fnatic, a very interesting team when it comes to offseason moves. So the offseason basically immediately started with Durka announcing that he was a restricted free agent. So a long-standing member of this Fnatic team getting kicked out. Seems like it was a org decision and not a player decision, which makes sense. Durka has said in the past that he wants to play on Fnatic for as long as he can. Seems like the org did not see eye to eye on that vision. They also lost Hero, who was a stand-in player for Leo, and it was pretty much known that he was just gonna be there for the last stretch of the year until Leo gets healthy. We don't at this point know where Leo's health is at. We don't know if he's gonna play, but what we do know is that Fnatic has picked up Kayak, a player that was previously on Apex, so he is replacing Durka's role. I don't hate the move. Kayak does seem like a pretty talented player, and in terms of replacements for Durka, that was probably one of the better ones that you could get looking at tier 2 teams. But overall, I still think that Durka is one of the best players to ever play Valorant. I think he's at least in the top 5 in that regard, and I think losing him, especially when he was your best player at Champions and one of the best players in the world for a lot of the time he's played. His overall 2024 season was definitely a downgrade from his standards, but that doesn't mean that he can have a bounce back year. He has shown a lot of consistency in Valorant throughout his time in the game, and I just think that it's just a bad move kicking out your best player. At least arguably. You can say that Alpha Year is their best or Leo's their best, and Leo was their best for a lot of the year until he stepped out. I just think that you can't really make the argument that Fnatic got better in this offseason, even though Kayak seems to be a good addition, but I think I'm going to put them in the worst category. If they prove me wrong, I'm totally fine to admit that, but I think overall, I think you're going to miss Durka. Moving on, we have another Turkish team in BBL Esports. Aside from having one of the funniest names in esports, they decided to go with a full rebuild of their roster, which makes a lot of sense. They have been one of the worst teams in the entire EMEA league for quite some time. So looking to finally make some improvements. They've been in Yampi. They have an entirely new roster now. Aside from Yampi, they brought in Social Bleed, Chiwa, Profek, and Loon. I don't know a ton about these players, but so far in the offseason, they've been very good. There has been a lot of praise for this new BBL roster team that I've seen online at the offseason events that they have been at so far. They've looked very dominant. Seems like their microplay is really good. Yampi is their IGL, which I do question how that's going to work out, but according to Sliggy, they have tried Yampi as IGL before, and he seems like a pretty good player at it. So hey, maybe it works out perfectly. And I think just from the upgrades that they've got, they didn't go big game hunting or anything. They built a roster that seems to be very well, gelled together, very good on the chemistry front. And it seems like they focus on having a team with structure instead of one that is just full of a bunch of stars. So I think that's a pretty good way to go. And I think the only place that I should put them is in improved a lot. I don't know how far this team is going to go. I don't know if I'm expecting them to be, attending international tournaments and all that stuff, but I think at the very least, they're much, much better than what they were before. Moving on to our second last team, we have Nodus Vincer. This is a team that made a big splash at the beginning of offseason by getting rid of all of their players except for 2. Angel and Shell are staying, Zipan, Soigetsu, and Artist are now gone. So the roster that has basically been together since 2022, the old FPX roster, and then Navi in 2023 and 2024, that is no more. Those players have split up. We have 2 remaining members, and what have they brought in to replace it? For their duelist position, they brought in Koala Noob, a player that was a duelist on M80. After M80 didn't win the Ascension tournament in the Americas, that roster ended up splitting up, and there was talk of maybe Koala Noob might not be able to find a spot because of the duelist position being so just saturated, but he did end up finding a spot on Navi, and that could be a pretty solid pickup. It's arguable how better or worse he is than Artist, but I think we just don't know yet because we haven't seen Koala Noob at the tier 1 level, and Artist, very inconsistent player. Artist was really good when he was really good and really bad when he was really bad, just kind of invisible at times. Not trying to shade him or anything. I think he's a very talented player and he should find a spot, but looks like he doesn't at this point. But they also bring in Hero, which is a good move. I think, taking advantage of Fnatic not bringing him back, even though he showed some really good talent. That's a pretty solid move in my opinion. Also bringing in a Turkish player by the name of Ruxic. I definitely think that the old Navi roster definitely needed a change of scenery. It was a roster that was just trying to cling on to a very good year in 2022, but they just haven't been able to replicate it yet. And I don't know if they were going to if they ended up staying together. So I think making changes is a good move overall, but I do fear that they may have done a bit of an overcorrection. They are losing some really good talent in Soigetsu and Zipan, but the replacements I think are overall pretty good, where I would not put them in much worse, but I would put them in, I don't know, because they underperformed this year. So can I say that they're worse off? I think overall I'm going to put them in worse. Keep in mind that they only lost in single elimination games in the playoffs, both times by Team Heretics. So if they ran into a different team, maybe we saw them at an international this year, but that did not happen. Team Heretics were their kryptonite this year. And yeah, I think that's fair to say that they're at least a little bit worse, and I think they may have overcorrected a bit, but I do want to see this roster do well because I want to see Qualanoob do well. He's Canadian. I like Canadians. I'm Canadian. And Hero showed a lot of promise last year, so I'm hoping that wasn't just a fluke. We will see. It all has to come together, especially under the new head coach in Happy. And last but certainly not least, kept this one last for a reason, Team Vitality. A team that has made massive moves in the offseason, probably the biggest moves out of all the EMEA teams and maybe throughout the whole VCT. They still have Safe, Kicks, and Trex, so 3 players that were on the team last year, so it's not a complete rebuild. And they're bringing in Durka from Fnatic and Les from Loud. So 2 players that have been very good in Valorant for a very long time that have now been excommunicated from their previous rosters. As I said earlier, Durka is an incredibly talented player, one of the best players to ever play the game. Les, while throughout the year in 2024 definitely had his down moments, he was still probably Loud's best player overall. So with these massive moves, getting a lot of talent, this big game hunting way of building a new roster, you would think that they should be and improved a lot. However, I really have concerns about this roster. I'm definitely getting Energy 2024 vibes from them. We haven't seen them play yet, so I can't say how I feel about them on the server yet because we haven't seen it. But my main concern is that Safe is their IGL now. And Safe, he had a weird year in 2024. He wasn't playing Duelist for most of the year. Then they put him on Duelist, and he ended up winning Best Duelist in EMEA for the last stretch of the season. So even though he didn't play it for Stage 1, he was so good at it in Stage 2 that he ended up winning that award. And now you bring in Durka, who is one of the best duelists to ever play the game. So of course, you're going to put him on Duelist. So now we're seeing the problem that we had with Safe last season where he wasn't playing to his strengths. He's probably not going to be playing that role again. Maybe we see this team on double Duelist comps. I can see that happening, but that shouldn't be your comps all the time. And we also haven't seen Safe as an IGL at the pro level yet, at least to my knowledge. Apparently when they talked about it and played together, that it all worked out and they actually enjoyed Safe on IGL. And I've no doubt that behind the scenes everything is all peachy clean, but can Safe be that star IGL for Tier 1, playing these very important matches, playing these VCT matches? Can he lead this team to rise above the rest? I think he's a very talented player, but to be successful in the VCT, we have seen that every team, at least most teams that win an international, have a star IGL. So while this team has a ton of talent, I definitely question the construction of this roster when it comes to their roles. While they picked up a lot of talent, I just don't have a good feeling about them. However, for this video, I will be putting them in improved a lot because again, with just what they picked up, that has to be a massive improvement. They were a good team last year, but one that definitely fell short of early expectations. So I think that they should be a lot better, but I just have this feeling about them. We'll see what ends up happening on that front. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of this list. Where do you think these teams should be? Please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.